The bridge of the Eternal Dawn shook as another blast from the Vorthok warships hit its shields. Admiral Kekstar gripped his command chair as sparks flew from damaged control panels around him. Through the main screen, he watched his fleet dying. 60 ships had entered the battle at Kepler Station 3 hours ago. Now, only 20 remained. The massive space station that had taken the Coalition 5 years to build was nothing but burning metal and twisted debris. Thousands of his people were dead, and the Vorthok Empire continued its deadly advance toward the heart of Coalition space. "Sir, the brave spirit is taking heavy damage," reported Commander Velinara from her position at the tactical station. Her blue skin had turned pale with stress, and her gill slits fluttered rapidly as she tried to process the flood of bad news coming from their dying fleet. Kekstar watched on the screen as the Coalition cruiser tried to escape the trap the Vorthok had set. 3 enemy destroyers closed in on the damaged ship, like hunters stalking wounded prey. The brave spirit fired its remaining weapons, but the shots barely scratched the enemy armor. Within seconds, the Vorthok ships opened fire, and the Coalition vessel exploded in a ball of white fire. "That makes it 19, Velinara said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of defeat that every officer on the bridge felt. The Admiral closed his 4 eyes and tried to think. For 6 months, the Vorthok Empire had swept through Coalition space like a plague. 17 star systems had fallen, to their advanced ships and brutal tactics. Every battle followed the same pattern. The Coalition would fight bravely, using their best strategies and weapons, but the Vorthok always found a way to win. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Captain Zorthal on the Starfire," the communications officer announced. Kekstar opened his eyes. The Starfire was one of their best ships, commanded by one of their finest captains. Zorthal was calling. It meant trouble. Put him through. The main screen changed to show Captain Zorthal on his bridge. The proud Zilani warrior looked terrible. Blood ran down the left side of his face from a head wound, and his uniform was torn and burned. Behind him, smoke filled the bridge as his crew worked frantically at their stations. "Admiral, we cannot hold this position much longer," Zorthal said, his voice weak but steady. "My ship is lost. Engines are dead, and we have hull breaches on 7 decks. Can you make it to the rally point?" Kekstar asked, though he already knew the answer. Zorthal shook his head. "Negative, sir. But before we die, I must give you something." He held up a small data chip. "This contains information about a species that might help us. I found it in the old archives while researching forgotten allies." "Captain, what are you talking about? Humans, sir? A young race that had contact with the galaxy 300 years ago? They withdrew to their home system and cut all communication, but the old record suggests they were fierce warriors and natural tacticians." Kekstar had heard the name before, but barely remembered anything about them. Most species in the Coalition considered humans to be primitive and unimportant. They had shown up in galactic politics for maybe 50 years before disappearing completely. "Sir, even if they still exist, how could such a young species help us? We have the combined might of 7 advanced civilizations, and we are losing," Velinara said from her station. Captain Zorthal coughed, and more blood appeared on his lips. "I know it sounds desperate, Admiral, but we are desperate. Coordinates to their system are on this chip. Maybe they learned something in their isolation that we missed." The screen shook as the Starfire took another hit. Alarms blared in the background, and Zorthal gripped his chair to stay upright. "I am transmitting the data now, sir. Use it well." The transmission cut to static as the Starfire exploded under concentrated Vorthok fire. Kekstar stared at the empty screen for a moment, then turned to his communications officer. "Did you receive the transmission?" "Yes, sir. The data is complete." "Admiral, we need to retreat." "The Vorthok are moving to surround us," Velinara reported urgently. Kekstar looked at the tactical display. The enemy ships were indeed closing in, trying to cut off their escape route. He had to make a choice between fighting a hopeless battle or living to fight another day. "All ships fall back to Nexus Prime. Execute retreat pattern 7. The remaining Coalition ships turned away from the battle and jumped to hyperspace, leaving the burning wreckage of Kepler Station behind. The Vorthok did not pursue. They never did. They simply consolidated their new territory and prepared for the next advance. During the 3-day journey to Nexus Prime, Kekstar studied the data Zorthel had died to give him. The information about humans was limited and old, but what he found was interesting. Records described a species that thought differently from other races. They took risks that others considered foolish, but somehow made those risks work. One report from a synthoid observer mentioned that humans seemed to have an unusual ability to adapt quickly to new situations. Another noted that they showed remarkable creativity in solving problems that stumped other species. But the most interesting comment came from a Zilani military advisor who had worked with human forces during a border dispute. These humans fight like no one else I have ever seen. They do not follow standard tactics, but their methods are effective. They seem to understand that sometimes the best strategy is to do what the enemy least expects. When the fleet arrived at Nexus Prime, Kekstar called an emergency meeting of the Coalition Council. The massive space station served as their final stronghold, protected by the largest defensive fleet they could assemble. Representatives from all 7 member species gathered in the Great Hall to hear his report on the disaster at Kepler Station. The news was as bad as expected. The council members sat in stunned silence as Kekstar described the battle and their terrible losses. When he finished, the hall erupted in angry voices. Some called for immediate surrender. Others demanded a final suicidal attack on the Vorthok home fleet. But when Kekstar mentioned the possibility of seeking help from humans, the reaction was even stronger. "You cannot be serious," declared General Torvak of the Zilani ground forces. "Asking help from such a primitive species would be shameful. We are proud warriors, not beggars." The logical analysis suggests that humans could provide minimal assistance, added Unit Prime of the Synthoids in its electronic voice. Their technology level 3 centuries ago was far below our current capabilities. Only Commander Velinara spoke in support of the idea. With respect to the Council, our pride and logic have not saved us from defeat. Perhaps it is time to try something different. The argument continued for hours, but Kekstar had already made his decision. That night, he ordered the small scout ship Stellar Wind to prepare for a secret mission to the Sol system. Whatever the Council decided, he would not let his people die without exploring every possible chance for survival, even if that chance came from a species the galaxy had forgotten. Captain Linder checked the navigation display for the 10th time in an hour. The small scout ship Stellar Wind had been traveling through hyperspace for 12 days, moving toward a system that most of the galaxy had forgotten, the young Morvani. Officer felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him like deep ocean water. Admiral Kekstar had chosen him personally for this task. Linder was young enough to be expendable if the mission failed, but experienced enough to handle first contact with an unknown species. The crew of 15 included the best diplomats and linguists the Coalition could spare, though everyone knew this was likely a one-way trip. "Captain, we are approaching the edge of the Sol system," announced Navigator Keelaton from his station. The Synthoid's electronic voice remained calm, but Linder could hear the slight change in tone that indicated concern. "Drop us out of hyperspace and begin passive scans," Linder ordered. "I want to know what we are dealing with before we announce our presence." The Stellar Wind emerged from the blue tunnel of hyperspace into normal space at the edge of the human home system. Lindor expected to see a few primitive orbital stations and maybe some basic mining operations. What appeared on their sensors shocked him into silence. The outer system was filled with activity. Massive space stations orbited several planets, connected by streams of cargo ships and passenger vessels. The energy readings showed technology that was clearly advanced, though different from anything the Coalition used. "Captain, I am detecting multiple artificial gravity wells," reported the sensor operator. "There are structures here that do not match any known design patterns." Before Linder could respond, the communications board lit up with incoming signals. 3 ships appeared on the main screen, materializing from what looked like empty space. The vessels were sleek and angular, painted in dark gray with blue markings. They moved with a grace that suggested very advanced engine technology. Unknown. Vessel, this is the Terran Defense Force. You have entered restricted space. State your identity and purpose immediately. The voice speaking over the communication channel was crisp and authoritative. Linder noticed that the speaker was using perfect galactic standard language. Despite humans supposedly having no contact with the galaxy for 3 centuries, this is Captain Linder of the Coalition vessel Stellar Wind. We come seeking an audience. With your leadership on a matter of great importance? There was a long pause before the human voice responded. Captain Linder, you will follow our escort ships to Terra Station. Any deviation from the prescribed course will be considered an act of aggression. Do you understand? Understood, Linder replied, though his hands were shaking slightly. The human ships had moved into escort formation without him even seeing them maneuver. Their technology was clearly far more advanced than the old records suggested. The journey to Terra Station took 2 hours. Linder spent the time studying the human ships through his sensors, but learned very little. The vessels seemed to absorb scanning attempts rather than reflect them. It was like trying to examine shadows. Terra Station itself was enormous, easily 10 times larger than Nexus Prime. The structure was a complex arrangement of rotating rings and docking arms that stretched for dozens of kilometers. Hundreds of ships moved around it in carefully controlled patterns, from tiny fighters to massive cargo haulers that dwarfed anything in the Coalition fleet. Captain, I am reading power. Signatures that should not be possible, whispered the sensor operator. Their main reactor is producing energy levels that match our entire battle fleet. The Stellar Wind was guided to a docking bay deep within the station. As the ship settled onto the landing platform, Linder watched through the viewports as human. Technicians moved around outside. They wore simple work clothes and moved with efficient purpose, but something about them made him nervous. These were not the primitive beings he had expected to find. Captain, incoming transmission from the station, announced the communications officer. Put it through. The main screen showed a human male in a dark blue uniform. He appeared to be in his 50s, with gray hair and steel-colored eyes that seemed to see everything. His face was weathered but alert, like a predator that had learned patience through experience. Captain Linder, I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You have requested an audience regarding a matter of great importance. I am prepared to listen. Linder stood and tried to project confidence he did not feel. Admiral Morrison, I come representing the Galactic Defense Coalition. We're facing complete destruction at the hands of the Vorthok Empire. Our leaders have sent me to request assistance from humanity. Morrison's expression did not change. The Vorthok Empire. Yes, we are aware of their activities. How many systems have they conquered? 17 in the past 6 months. They have destroyed most of our fleet and are advancing toward our core worlds. We estimate that we have perhaps 2 months before total defeat. The human admiral nodded. Slowly, Captain. I will need to hear the full details of your situation. However, first I must ask why the Coalition has chosen to approach humanity for assistance. Your records indicate that most galactic species consider us to be primitive and insignificant. Linder felt heat rise in his gill slits. The Admiral's tone was polite, but there was an edge to it that suggested he knew exactly how the galaxy viewed his species. Sir, we are desperate. The Vorthok have proven superior to our combined forces in every engagement. We need allies who can think differently, who can provide new strategies and technologies. I see. And what makes you believe that humans possess these capabilities? The old records suggest that your people were natural warriors and tacticians. One report specifically mentioned that humans fight in ways that other species do not expect. Admiral, Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying Linder through the screen. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. Captain, you and your crew will be brought aboard Terra Station as our guests. You will be given quarters and allowed to rest while I review your situation with my staff. Tomorrow, we will discuss whether humanity can provide the assistance you seek. The transmission ended, leaving Linder staring at a blank screen. Within minutes, human personnel entered the Stellar Wind to escort the Coalition crew to their quarters. Humans were polite and professional, but Linder noticed that they were also clearly armed and alert. The quarters provided for the Coalition Crew were comfortable and well appointed, but Linder could not sleep. Through the large window in his room, he could see the constant activity of the space station. Ships came and went at all hours, and he could see construction work being done on what looked like military vessels. The next morning, Admiral Morrison himself came to escort Linder to the meeting. They walked through corridors filled with human personnel who moved with military precision. The walls displayed star charts and tactical information that Linder could not fully understand, but which clearly showed detailed knowledge of galactic affairs. Admiral, may I ask how humanity has remained so well informed about galactic events if you have had no official contact for 3 centuries? Morrison smiled slightly. Captain, just because we withdrew from galactic politics does not mean we stopped paying attention. We have been watching and learning for a very long time. They entered a large conference room where several other humans waited. Admiral Morrison introduced them as his senior staff, including General Lisa Parker, the chief military strategist. She was a sharp-eyed woman who studied Linder with the same intensity that Morrison had shown. Captain Linder, General Parker said, we have reviewed the information you provided about the Vorthok Empire. Their tactics are indeed effective against conventional galactic military doctrine. However, we believe there may be ways to counter their advantages. You will help us? Linder asked, hardly daring to hope. Admiral Morrison leaned forward. Captain, humanity has been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. We did not withdraw from the galaxy out of fear or disinterest. We withdrew to develop new capabilities and strategies. The Vorthok represent exactly the kind of threat we have been planning to face. General Parker activated a holographic display that showed detailed battle plans and ship designs. The Vorthok rely on rigid command structures and overwhelming firepower. They adapt slowly to new tactics because their culture does not encourage creative thinking among lower ranks. This gives us several opportunities to exploit. Linder stared at the display in amazement. The humans had not only studied the Vorthok, but had developed comprehensive plans to defeat them. The strategies were unlike anything the Coalition had attempted, focusing on disruption and psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. How long would it take to implement these plans? Linder asked. Admiral Morrison stood and walked to the large window that looked out over the space station's docking bays. Captain, the first human task force can be ready to depart within 48 hours. We have been preparing for this war for a very long time. Linder felt hope rising in his chest for the first time in months. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy's forgotten warriors could turn the tide of a war that seemed impossible to win. Captain Linder followed Admiral Morrison through the massive corridors of Terra Station toward what the humans called the Strategic Operations Center. The walk took nearly 20 minutes, and with each step Linder saw more evidence of human military preparation that shocked him. Teams of technicians worked on weapon systems he did not recognize. Soldiers trained with equipment that looked decades ahead of Coalition technology. Most disturbing of all, he saw star charts covering entire walls that showed detailed information about every major battle the Coalition had fought against the Vorthok. Admiral, how long have your people been monitoring our war? Linder asked, as they waited for a security door to scan Morrison's identification. Since the first Vorthok attack on the Kepler mining colony 6 months ago, Morrison replied, we have sensor networks throughout this region of the galaxy. Nothing happens in Coalition space that we do not know about within hours. The security door opened to reveal a room that took Linder's breath away. The Strategic Operations Center was enormous, filled with hundreds of workstations where human officers analyzed data from across the galaxy. Holographic displays showed real-time information about Vorthok fleet movements, Coalition defensive positions, and refugee evacuation routes. At the center of it all stood General Lisa Parker, studying a 3-dimensional map of the war zone that floated in the air above a circular platform. She looked up as Morrison and Linder approached. Captain Linder, welcome to our war room, she said. Hope you are prepared to see how we plan to defeat the Vorthok Empire. Linder stared at the holographic display. It showed the current positions of every major fleet in the war, updated in real time. Coalition forces appeared as blue dots, while Vorthok ships showed up as red. The amount of red was terrifying. General, How is this possible? You have not shared our fleet positions. With anyone outside the coalition? Parker smiled grimly. Captain, we have been watching this war very carefully. We know where every ship is, what weapons they carry, and how much fuel they have remaining. We also know things about the Vorthok that your people have not discovered. She waved her hand, and the display changed to show detailed schematics of Vorthok warships. Linder had seen these vessels in battle, but never with this level of detail. The humans had somehow obtained complete technical specifications for every class of enemy ship. The Vorthok believe their technology is superior, and in many ways they are correct, Parker continued. Their ships are heavily armed and well protected, but they have 3 critical weaknesses that your people have not exploited. Morrison stepped forward and pointed to specific areas on the ship schematics. First, their command and control systems are highly centralized. Every ship in a Vorthok fleet receives orders from a single command vessel. Destroy or disable that ship, and the entire fleet loses coordination. Second, Parker added, their weapon systems draw enormous amounts of power from the main reactor. If you can force them to fire continuously for more than 20 minutes, their power output drops significantly. Their ships become vulnerable during the recharge cycle. Linder studied the information carefully. The coalition had noticed some of these patterns during battles, but had never understood their significance. What is the third weakness? Psychology, Morrison said simply. The Vorthok command structure does not allow for independent thinking among lower-ranking officers. When their battle plans fail, they do not adapt quickly because junior officers are afraid to make decisions without orders from above. Parker gestured, and the display changed again to show a series of battle simulations. This is how we plan to exploit these weaknesses. Instead of meeting the Vorthok in traditional fleet battles, we will use small strike teams to target their command ships, while larger forces provide distraction. The simulation showed human ships using stealth technology to penetrate Vorthok formations. They moved like ghosts, invisible to enemy sensors, until they struck at the heart of the enemy fleet. Meanwhile, coalition forces engaged the Vorthok front lines, keeping them busy while the humans did their work. Your stealth technology is impressive, Lindor said. But surely the Vorthok will adapt once they understand your tactics. That is where human psychology becomes an advantage, Morrison explained. We do not think like other species, Captain. When our first plan stops working, we immediately switch to something completely different. The Vorthok will spend time adapting. 2 tactics we have already abandoned. Parker activated another display that showed human ship designs. Linder had seen these vessels when he arrived at Terra Station, but now he could study them in detail. They were unlike anything in the galaxy, combining technologies from multiple species with innovations that were purely human. These ships were designed specifically to fight the Vorthok, Parker said. We studied every battle your people fought and learned from your mistakes. Our vessels are faster, more maneuverable, and carry weapon systems designed to exploit Vorthok weaknesses. Walked to another section of the operations center where a group of human officers worked at a large tactical display. Captain, meet Commander Ryan Clark. He will be leading our first task force to Coalition space. Commander Clark was a man in his 30s with dark hair and intense green eyes. His uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Defense Force, but Linder noticed additional patches that suggested extensive combat experience. Captain Linder, Clark said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. I understand you have been fighting the Vorthok for 6 months. I would like to hear your personal assessment of their tactics. Linder spent the next hour describing every battle he had witnessed or participated in. Commander Clark listened, carefully asking detailed questions about Vorthok response times, communication patterns, and command decisions. The human officer took notes on a portable device and occasionally consulted with other members of his staff. The pattern is clear, Clark said when Linder finished. The Vorthok are excellent at executing planned attacks, but they struggle when faced with unexpected situations. Our strategy will focus on creating chaos in their formations. General Parker rejoined the group and activated a new display showing the human fleet that would accompany Linder back to Coalition space. 200 ships of various sizes filled the holographic projection. from small fighters to massive battleships that dwarfed anything the Coalition possessed. "This is Task Force Alpha," she announced. "Commander Clark will lead them aboard the TDF Resolute. Captain Lindor, your ship will guide them to Nexus Prime, where they will coordinate with Admiral Kekstar." Lindor stared at the display in amazement. The human task force was smaller than a typical Coalition fleet. But every ship looked like it had been designed by engineers who understood exactly how to fight the Vorthok. "General, when can we depart?" he asked. "Immediately," Morrison replied. "Our ships have been ready for weeks. We are simply waiting for official contact from the Coalition." As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the operations center. Red lights flashed, and officers rushed to their stations. A communications technician called out urgent information. "Admiral, priority message from Deep Space Monitor 7. Large Vorthok fleet detected moving toward the Cygnus sector. Estimated time to Coalition defensive positions is 36 hours. Morrison and Parker exchanged grim looks. The Cygnus sector contained 3 heavily populated worlds and the Coalition's largest remaining shipyard. If it fell, the war would be over. "Change of plans," Morrison announced. "Commander Clark, you will depart immediately with Task Force Alpha. Captain Linder will guide you directly to the Cygnus sector. We are going to give the Vorthok their first taste of human warfare." Clark saluted and turned to leave, but Morrison called him back. "Commander, remember what we discussed about human advantages. The Vorthok have never faced an enemy like us. Use that to your advantage." "Understood, sir. You will not know what hit them." Within 2 hours, the human task force was ready to depart. Lindor stood on the bridge of the Stellar Wind, watching through the viewports as the sleek human warships formed up around his small scout vessel. The TDF Resolute took position at the head of the formation, its dark hull bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. "Captain Linder, this is Commander Clark aboard the Resolute," came the voice over the communication system. "We're ready to depart on your signal." Lindor took a deep breath and gave the order that would change the course of the war. All ships jumped to hyperspace. Destination: Cygnus sector. The combined fleet disappeared into the blue tunnel of hyperspace, carrying humanity into its first galactic war. Behind them, Terra Station continued its preparations as more human fleets readied for battle. Galaxy was about to discover that the species it had forgotten had spent 3 centuries becoming the most dangerous warriors in known space. Admiral Morrison watched the fleet depart from the observation deck of Terra Station. General Parker joined him at the large window that looked out into space. "Do you think they can win?" she asked. Morrison smiled coldly. He said the Vorthok have been fighting civilized species who follow predictable military doctrine, Dev. Never faced humans in combat. They are about to learn why that was a very serious mistake. The combined human and Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Cygnus system to find exactly what they had feared. The Vorthok invasion force was already there, a massive collection of dark ships arranged in perfect formation. Around the 3 inhabited planets, from his position on the bridge of the TDF Resolute, Commander Ryan Clark counted over 300 enemy vessels. "Captain Linder, are you seeing this?" Clark asked over the communication channel to the Stellar Wind. "Yes, Commander. The Vorthok have brought their entire 7th Fleet. This is the largest force they have deployed since the war began." Clark studied the tactical display as his officers gathered information about the enemy formation. The Vorthok had positioned their ships to bombard the planetary defensive stations while their assault transports prepared to land ground forces. It was a textbook invasion, exactly what human strategists had expected. "Sir, I am detecting massive energy buildup from the Vorthok command ship," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from her position at the weapons station. "They appear to be charging some kind of planetary bombardment weapon." Clark looked at the main screen where the enemy flagship dominated the center of their formation. The massive vessel was twice the size of any Coalition ship, bristling with weapons and protected by energy shields that glowed like purple fire around its hull. "How long until they can fire?" 15 minutes at current charge rate, sir." Clark opened a channel to the coalition forces that had arrived just hours before the human fleet. Admiral Kekstar commanded them from the Bridge of the Eternal Dawn, which looked tiny compared to the Vorthok armada. Admiral Kekstar, this is Commander Clark. We need to execute the attack plan immediately. If that command ship fires on the planets, millions will die. Understood, Commander. Coalition forces are ready to begin the diversionary attack. Clark turned to his tactical officer, Lieutenant Foster, signal all human ships. Execute battle plan Omega. Target priority is the command vessel Darkness Eternal. The battle began exactly as the humans had planned. The coalition ships charged directly toward the Vorthok formation, firing all weapons and drawing enemy attention. The Vorthok responded, predictably, turning their guns on the attacking coalition vessels while maintaining their bombardment charge sequence. While the enemy focused on the frontal assault, the human ships seemed to disappear. Advanced stealth systems rendered them nearly invisible to Vorthok sensors. 200 human vessels split into small groups and began moving through the enemy formation like ghosts in the night. Sir, we are approaching the target, reported the navigation officer. Stealth systems are holding. The Vorthok have not detected our approach. Clark watched as his strike teams closed in on their objectives. Each group had a specific target: command ships, communication relays, and weapon control centers. The plan required precise timing and perfect execution. All strike teams, report status, Clark ordered. Team Alpha in position at communication. Array Team Beta, approaching secondary command vessel. Team Gamma, ready to strike weapon control center. Clark waited until all teams confirmed ready status. In the distance, he could see the coalition ships taking heavy damage as they fought, desperately against overwhelming odds. Admiral Kekstar was keeping his part of the bargain, but his ships could not hold out much longer. All teams, execute attack now. The human ships dropped their stealth systems and opened fire simultaneously. Concentrated beam weapons struck critical systems throughout the Vorthok formation. The communication array exploded in a ball of white fire. Secondary command ships lost power as human torpedoes punched through their shields. Weapon control centers went offline as precisely targeted. Strikes disabled their systems. The effect on the Vorthok fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had been firing in perfect coordination suddenly stopped as their targeting systems failed. The massive command ship tried to continue its bombardment sequence, but without support from the fleet network, its weapon systems began to malfunction. Sir, the enemy flagship is losing power to its main weapon, Foster reported with excitement in her voice. The bombardment has been stopped. But Clark was not finished. While his strike teams had disabled the Vorthok command structure, his main assault force had been moving into position for the killing blow. 50 human battleships emerged from stealth directly behind the enemy flagship. All ships, concentrate. Fire on the Darkness Eternal. Target the reactor core. The human battleships opened fire with weapons designed specifically to penetrate Vorthok armor. Particle beams and antimatter torpedoes slammed into the massive enemy ship, overwhelming its shields and punching deep into its hull. Secondary explosions began to ripple along the flagship's length as critical systems failed. On the Bridge of the Darkness Eternal, Overlord Thokmar watched in growing fury as his perfectly planned invasion fell apart. His communication systems were down, his weapon control centers were offline, and his flagship was taking damage from enemies he could barely detect. How are these humans doing this? He roared at his tactical officer. Our intelligence reports said they were primitive warriors with basic technology. Sir, their ships appear to use stealth systems far advanced of anything we have encountered. Their weapons are specifically designed to exploit our defensive weaknesses. Thakmar slammed his fist on his command chair. The Vorthok had conquered 17 star systems using overwhelming force and superior technology. No enemy had ever successfully penetrated their formations or disabled their command networks. Order all ships to fall back and regroup at rally. Point 7, he commanded. Sir, our communication systems are down. I cannot transmit orders to the fleet. For the first time in his military career, Overlord Thokmar felt something he had never experienced before: fear. fleet was being torn apart by an enemy that fought unlike anyone they had ever faced. Meanwhile, Commander Clark pressed his advantage. The Vorthok fleet was in chaos. Individual ships trying to fight independently without coordination from their command structure. Human strike teams continued to hit critical targets, while the main battle line supported the coalition forces. Enemy ships are beginning to retreat, reported the tactical officer. They appear to be falling back in disorder. Do not let them escape, Clark ordered. If even one Vorthok ship gets away, they will report our tactics to their high command. We need complete victory here. The human ships pursued the retreating Vorthok with ruthless efficiency. Their superior speed and maneuverability allowed them to catch enemy vessels that tried to flee. One by one, Vorthok ships were destroyed or disabled until only scattered debris remained. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the entire Vorthok 7th Fleet had been destroyed or captured. Not a single enemy ship escaped to carry word of the defeat back to Vorthok High Command. Commander Clark stood on the bridge of the Resolute, looking out at the battlefield, where the wreckage of 300 enemy ships drifted in space. Own losses had been minimal. 12 human ships damaged, none destroyed. The coalition had lost 8 vessels, but Admiral Kekstar considered it a miracle that any of his ships had survived. Commander Clark, this is Admiral Kekstar, came the voice over the communication system. On behalf of the coalition, I thank you for this victory. You have shown us that the Vorthok can be defeated. Clark opened a channel to all ships in the combined fleet. All vessels. This is Commander Clark. Today we have proven that the Vorthok Empire is not invincible. But this is only the beginning. Word of this battle will spread throughout coalition space and beyond. The galaxy will know that humanity has returned to the war, and we do not intend to lose. On the planets below, billions of civilians who had been preparing for invasion watched the debris of the Vorthok fleet burning in their skies. News of the victory spread across coalition space within hours, carried by the fastest communication. Networks available. For the first time in 6 months, coalition worlds had hope. The unstoppable Vorthok Empire had been stopped. It had been done by a species that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. In the depths of space, automatic. Distress beacons from destroyed Vorthok ships broadcast their final messages toward the Empire's core worlds. When those signals reached Vorthok High Command, they would learn that their 7th Fleet had been completely destroyed by an unknown enemy. Using tactics and technology unlike anything they had encountered, the war was about to change in ways that no one could predict. Captain Linder stood on the bridge of the Stellar Wind, watching human recovery teams search the battlefield for Vorthok survivors and salvageable technology. In 12 hours, everything had changed. The coalition had gone from facing certain defeat to winning their first major victory of the war. Captain, incoming message from Terra Station, his communications officer announced. Admiral Morrison appeared on the main screen, and Linder could see satisfaction in the human commander's eyes. Captain Linder, Commander Clark has reported complete success at Cygnus. I trust you are satisfied with humanity's contribution to your war effort. Linder smiled for the first time in months. Admiral Morrison, I believe this is the beginning of a very productive partnership. 3 months after the victory at Cygnus, the combined human and coalition fleet assembled at the edge of the Helix Nebula for the final battle of the war. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TDF Defiance, watching as nearly 800 ships formed into attack formation. The largest fleet in galactic history was preparing to end the Vorthok threat once and for all. Admiral, final fleet reports are coming in, announced Captain Amy Foster, who had been promoted after her heroic actions at Cygnus. All human task. Forces report ready for battle. Coalition forces under Admiral Kekstar are in position. Morrison nodded as he studied the tactical display. The Vorthok had retreated to their last stronghold in the nebula after losing 12 major battles to the Human Coalition Alliance. Intelligence reports suggested that Supreme Overlord Macthel himself commanded the enemy fleet from aboard the massive fortress ship Void Crusher. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting the Vorthok fleet, reported Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez from his position at the sensor station. They have over 400 ships, including their entire remaining battle fleet. Morrison opened a communication channel to Admiral L. Shekstar on the Eternal Dawn. The proud Zilani commander had become a close ally over the past months, learning to appreciate human tactical thinking while contributing his own strategic insights. Kekstar, are your forces ready for the final push? Ready and eager, Admiral Morrison. My people have waited a long time for this moment. The Vorthok will pay for every world they destroyed. Morrison turned to his fleet communications officer. Signal all ships. Execute attack plan Delta. Human forces will punch through their center while coalition ships hit their flanks. Remember, our primary target is the Void Crusher. The massive fleet began moving into the nebula, where swirling clouds of gas and dust provided cover for both sides. The Vorthok had chosen their position well, using the nebula's energy fields to hide their exact numbers and positions. Sir? The enemy is hailing us, announced the communications officer. Put it through. The main screen showed a Vorthok commander unlike any they had faced before. Supreme Overlord Makthal was ancient even by Vorthok standards, his scarred face bearing the marks of countless battles. His eyes burned with intelligence and hatred as he spoke. I am Supreme Overlord Makthal, master of the Vorthok Empire. You are the human commander who has caused so much trouble for my forces. I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. I am here to end your war of conquest. Makthal's lips curved in what might have been a smile. You interest me. Human. Your species fights unlike any we have encountered. But you have made one critical error. What error is that? You have cornered a predator in its lair. Today, you will learn why the Vorthok Empire has never been defeated in battle. The transmission ended as the Vorthok fleet emerged from the nebula clouds in perfect battle formation. Morrison had to admit that it was an impressive sight. The enemy ships moved with precision that spoke of centuries of military tradition and discipline. But he also noticed something that confirmed his battle plan would work. The Vorthok were still fighting like they always had, relying on overwhelming firepower and rigid formations. They had learned nothing from their previous defeats. All ships engaged the enemy, Morrison commanded. The battle began with an exchange of weapon fire that lit up the nebula like a miniature star. Coalition ships charged the Vorthok flanks, while human vessels used their superior speed to penetrate the enemy center. The fighting was brutal and desperate, with ships exploding on both sides as the two fleets tore into each other. Captain Foster led a squadron of human destroyers in a daring attack on the Vorthok supply ships. Her ships moved through the enemy, formation like sharks, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. Each successful attack weakened the Vorthok fleet's ability to sustain the battle. Major Danny Green commanded the fighter squadrons that swarmed around the larger ships like angry insects. His pilots had trained specifically to exploit Vorthok fighter weaknesses, using human creativity and adaptability to outmaneuver enemies with superior individual ships. Sir, we are breaking through their center line, reported Rodriguez. Path to the Void Crusher is clear. Morrison looked at the tactical display and saw his moment. The Vorthok formation was beginning to crack under the pressure of fighting on multiple fronts. Their rigid command structure was failing as junior officers struggled to adapt to the chaos of battle. All human battleships follow the Defiance. We are going after their flagship. The massive human dreadnoughts pushed through the Vorthok lines, their heavy armor shrugging off enemy fire as they closed in on the Void Crusher. The enemy flagship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of Morrison's ship. But the Admiral had learned that size was not everything in space combat. Target their weapon systems first, Morrison ordered. Disable their guns before they can. Bring them to bear. The human ships opened fire with concentrated beam weapons, targeting specific points on the enemy flagship where intelligence suggested critical systems were located. The Void Crusher returned fire with weapons that could destroy a city, but human ships were too fast and maneuverable to present easy targets. Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the Void Crusher, announced the communications officer. Supreme Overlord Makthal wishes to speak with you. Put him through.
Makthal
Appeared on the screen again, but this time his bridge was filled. with smoke and sparks from damaged systems. The ancient Vorthok leader looked furious, but also strangely excited. "Human Admiral, you have proven yourself a worthy opponent." Right. One invoked the ancient right of single combat. "Face me aboard my ship, and let our personal battle determine the outcome of this war." Morrison considered the offer. Vorthok tradition held that if their supreme leader was defeated in honorable combat, all remaining forces would surrender. It could end the war immediately and save thousands of lives. I accept your challenge, Overlord. Prepare to receive me aboard your ship." "Admiral, you cannot be serious," protested Captain Foster. "This could be a trap." "Perhaps, but if it is legitimate, this could end the war right now. Continue the battle until I return." Morrison took a small shuttle to the Void Crusher, escorted by a squadron of human fighters. The ancient Vorthok traditions demanded that single combat be conducted fairly, so he trusted that Macthal would honor the agreement. The shuttle docked in the enemy ship's main bay, where Morrison was met by an honor guard of Vorthok warriors. They escorted him through corridors filled with alien technology to a large chamber where Macthal waited. The Vorthok leader had removed his armor and stood holding a traditional sword that hummed with energy. Morrison drew his own weapon, a modern plasma blade that had been designed for close combat in space. "You are smaller than I expected, human," Macthal said as they circled each other. "But I sense strength in you. This will be a proper battle." Two commanders fought for 20 minutes in a brutal duel that tested every skill Morrison had learned in decades of military service. Macthal was incredibly strong and experienced, but Morrison was faster and more adaptable. When the ancient Vorthok leader finally fell, it was because he could not adjust to Morrison's unconventional fighting style. "You fight well, human," Macthal gasped as he lay dying. "Perhaps your species will bring new strength to the galaxy. I order my forces to surrender to you with honor." Morrison returned to his fleet to find that the Vorthok ships had indeed stopped fighting. Across the battlefield, enemy vessels were powering down their weapons and transmitting surrender codes. The war was over. In the months that followed, a new galactic alliance was formed with humanity as a founding member. The coalition species, once skeptical of the young race, now recognized humans as natural leaders and innovators. Admiral Morrison was appointed as the Alliance's first supreme commander, with Admiral Kekstar serving as his deputy. The defeated Vorthok revealed that they had been fleeing from an even greater threat in their home galaxy. This news prompted the Alliance to begin preparing for future conflicts, while integrating Vorthok refugees into their society. Construction began on New Terra Station, a massive joint facility that would serve as the Alliance's headquarters. The station combined the best technologies from all member species, creating something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. Captain Linder, now promoted to admiral, stood in the observation deck of the new station watching ships from dozens of species working together in ways that had seemed impossible just a year earlier. The desperate gamble to contact humanity had not only saved the coalition, but had created something entirely new. As he watched human engineers working alongside Zilani warriors and Morvani scientists, Linder reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. The species that had been forgotten and dismissed as primitive had proven to be exactly what the galaxy needed: leaders who could think differently, adapt quickly, and bring out the best in others. Long-range sensors were already detecting movement in distant galaxies, suggesting that humanity's greatest challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time since the war began, the galaxy faced the future with hope instead of fear. The age of human leadership and galactic affairs had begun,